Good morning. Oh, so first of all, I just want to say this is both my first time at South by Southwest, and I believe Reverend Jackson's as well. So look at, can't see no faces.
It's not my first time of morning sessions after long nights, however.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, can't see any faces, just phones up. So that's where we are at the age of technology. We're going to have a conversation about technology, where we're going as a country in terms of inclusion. My name is Van Jones. I'm with an organization called Yes We Code. We are a partner with Reverend Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition. Reverend Jackson actually doesn't need any introduction, but I like to give him one anyway. When you have a living legend, somebody who's literally, you cannot tell the history of the second half of last century without mentioning his name multiple times. We can sometimes imagine we know everything that's important about him. I just want to point out things that people may not know. Reverend Jackson was not born with the silver spoon in his mouth. He was born in poverty, in segregation, to a teenage mother, and through dint of personality, character, hard work, and genius, was able to not only change his circumstances, but help the country to change our circumstances. One thing he did in particular that I think he gets not enough credit for, he was with Dr. King in '68 when Dr. King was killed. Dr. King had a vision at that time called the Poor People's Campaign. If you look at that campaign, the structure of it was African Americans, Mexican Americans, Appalachians, students, a rainbow coalition, so to speak, talking about democracy and the economy. Reverend Jackson was there when Dr. King was killed. A less courageous person might have exited the scene at that point. Medgar Evers had been killed. Malcolm X had been killed. Many lesser-known activists had been killed, and now Dr. King had been killed. That might be a time to step back. Reverend Jackson said, step forward. And 20 years later, in his second run for the presidency, pulled together a coalition very much like Dr. King's coalition, but this coalition, the Rainbow Coalition, actually wound up almost getting the presidency. The first African-American man running for office talking about hope was not President Obama, it was Jesse Louis Jackson saying keep hope alive in '84 and '88. That campaign actually changed the rules in the Democratic Party. Reverend Jackson said, I got a lot more votes than I have delegates. That's not fair. I will certainly support this party, but the party needs to support its voters, its base, and they changed the rules in '88 for proportional representation. Had they not done that in 2008, and they changed the rules in 1988, had they had not been for the Jesse Jackson fairness rules in '88, in 2008, Hillary Clinton would have been the nominee. In other words, under the old rules, Hillary Clinton would have won because there would have been no proportionality. Under the new rules, Obama won. So the fact that you have an African-American president named President Barack Obama, whether you love him or not, is a direct result of Dr. King's vision in '68, being given electoral power in '88. That coalition then became the governing coalition in 2008, a 40-year arc. And so this is an engineer for change. We have engineers here in the room. And what I wanted to...
May I make this one?
Yes, sir.
Audit? From 1896 to 1954 was legally legitimate segregation by race. That was a 58-year struggle, and the chief force in that was led by, the last leg was led by Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall litigation. Dr. King in that group was demonstration, Lyndon Johnson legislation. Those three giants have a kind of continuity, and as it were, Johnson appointed Thurgood Marshall. So the litigation, demonstration, legislation all fits together because either of those legs from the stool, it would have fallen. All of them matter very much. I always want to give real proper dues to the role that Thurgood Marshall played to make apartheid illegal, and the role that Lyndon Johnson played to fulfill the dream. Dr. King gave the I Have a Dream speech August 28, 1963. Johnson comes before the Congress January 8, 1964, laying out a vision for a new, more inclusive America. If Johnson had lost to Nixon, for example, there's a whole range of things that we would not have had as a people. I also think, Van, that while the media will look at the civil movement as black, and it was that to the extent that blacks got the right to vote in 1870 and left it in the hands of slave masters to implement, and they would not, to 1965. But blacks couldn't vote, white women couldn't serve on juries. 18-year-olds or serving in Vietnam could not vote. You couldn't vote on college campuses, and you couldn't vote bilingually, nor get proportionality. So as a kind of backdrop to proportionality meant that it was always a multiracial, multicultural kind of rainbow struggle.
Good, good, good. Well, part of the reason that I wanted to start off with your part of the American story and seeing you as an engineer to make change is because there have been some changes this past year that you know a little bit about. For a long time, nobody knew exactly what the diversity numbers were in Silicon Valley. We kind of suspected that maybe women weren't represented, but we weren't sure. We kind of suspected that there may not have been enough people of color presence, but we weren't sure. And then magically last year, the numbers came out. And I think very few people know the role that you played in helping the country get a grip on this problem by getting the data released. Could you, you shared a story with me about how you went about as an engineer for change, getting Silicon Valley, which is data-driven, to be data transparent.
Point one, it wasn't magic.
It was not magic.
It was not magic. Well, in the process of change, you always try to use research, education, negotiation, action, and reconciliation as a kind of rhythm. And we found out that there were the top 22 companies, 189 board members, 36 white women, 3 African Americans, 1 Latino. That was the first indication that the culture was stacked against women and people of color. Then we began to raise questions about the C-suites, like 370 in the C-suites, like 6 blacks and 3 Latinos. That part was off. And then employment magically around 2% for all of them, right across the board. 2 was like the magic number. And almost no investment in startups. So it was clear we had a body of data that said we had to unravel this. And so we went to a shareholders meeting at HP. And because at first we started raising these questions, these companies formed a coalition of sorts. They filed a lawsuit saying that they could not reveal, make public their data because it would create for them competitive disadvantage. And they won the lawsuit. So we bought shares of stock to circumvent that process. As a shareholder, we were able to get the floor and say, Meg, the African Americans and Latinos are 25 to 30% of the market. None of them are on our board. The magic is shifting from a protester to a shareholder, quote unquote, outside protester, inside shareholder.
So you bought stock, and then you went to the shareholders meeting as a stock owner as opposed to a protester.
We went to the shareholders meeting in Microsoft and Apple and eBay and Google and the rest of them. And our board does not look like our consumer base or our talent pool. The reason there's such a deficit of women and people of color is not a lack of ability, it's a lack of opportunity. Shareholders can talk that way, you know. So our C-suites do not look like our consumer base. And that it means that it may not just be race or gender theories that's locking people out, what I call cultural blinders. If you're a great quarterback but only have one eye, your one-eyed quarterback just can't see the field. And here over here, women and people of color on your blind side, And on the blind side, what is there over there that you don't see? Market, money, talent, location, and growth. And so we endeavor to begin to open up the marketplace as shareholders. And in one phase of our struggle, you may have had board leaders arguing, justifying race, justifying gender exclusion. But that's not what you found in Silicon Valley. You found people somewhat ashamed of those numbers because they were embarrassing. And Intel had let their numbers out for EEO1 some time ago. But then Google made public their numbers. Then they began to fall. It was a kind of we too. Right. They found a comfort zone, and we're no worse than they are. Right. So the next phase had to be to go from admitting all of us are far beneath the market into a plan for goals, targets, and timetables, and therefore the meeting at Intel, where they began to put forth their 2020 plan, and now Apple is putting together its plan. So now the next phase is to go from how exclusionary the patents have been to a plan per company for goals, targets, and timetables to make the company look like the marketplace.
Well, I mean, I bet, now how many people here, just quick poll, you guys are all well-informed people. You carry little information devices around all the time. You probably even have watched something called television. I don't know if you guys remember that. There's something called television. You guys carry around in your pockets now. How many of you well-informed people knew the role that Reverend Jackson had played in getting the numbers released? Got a few. But a decided minority. I just think that's very interesting that you have a living legend who has been a part of not just the African-American fight, but early on in the 1980s, people forget, there was such a stigma against the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. AIDS phobia was being used as an excuse for homophobia, both wrong and immoral. And an African-American minister from the church, Reverend Jackson, led that fight, or helped to lead that fight publicly. So you have someone who's been a part of every struggle, labor, Latino, immigrant, LGBT, et cetera, who goes to Silicon Valley not as a protester, but as a shareholder, helping these companies expand. We all hear about the numbers.
With the capacity to protest.
Right, with the capacity.
And the will to protest if they didn't do the right thing.
But
the reason I raise that, because you can get shares of stock to change your private position, or you can protest to change the condition. And ours was a social justice agenda to change the condition of the locked out. But the argument that we made was not so much of a negative threat, but a value-added argument. That's to say that when they were, rather than look for young African Americans or Latinos to educate, they were using the V1 visa workers. They were used right down the street with the same capacity, not being trained to do the same work. And that's where the rub comes in. Now we want all these school systems to have at least one STEM school, should be in drill practice, and computer science, because there is no talent deficit. There's no missing gene factor. There's no opportunity deficit. The lack of appreciation of uncultivated market upon our own nose.
Now, you and I were together in Selma just 2 weeks ago, 50th anniversary of that historic march. You've done that. That wasn't new to you. You've done that march 48 times since that bloody Sunday. You are a bridge crosser. You've been crossing bridges your whole life, bridges of class, of gender, of exclusion, globally, not just here in the United States. And you said something when you were meeting with the folks at Apple, connecting Selma to Silicon Valley. I just wondered, from a civil rights perspective, what were you trying to communicate at that point?
I was trying to say, beyond the bridge and the right to vote, if one makes the case that there are 4 stages of our struggle from slavery to equality. The first stage 246 years was to end legal slavery. The second stage to end legal apartheid laws. The third stage to get the right, the protected right to vote. Dr. King's last argument was you can be out of slavery, out of Jim Crow, have the right to vote and starve to death. You should have access to the force to access to capital, industry, technology, and deal flow. So beyond the bridge is the issue of access to education, technology, and to fight poverty, which is a weapon of mass destruction. I thought what was missing in the celebration were two things. One was that Dallas County, which Selma is about 40% poverty now. 40% poverty.
40% of the people in Selma right now are in poverty.
Poverty. Mrs. Boynton, the woman who invited Dr. King to Selma, her house is now condemned. Down that street are houses without indoor running water and without no toilets today. So when you just focus on the bridge and the main street and go back out, you miss the part that's dressed up. That's why Lyndon Johnson had to connect the right to vote with the war on poverty, because the right to vote without addressing poverty, you're just recycling leadership, not recycling change. So to even to speak of the right to vote without the right to be educated, the right to eat, therefore the right for health care, it all kind of somewhat connects. And I thought that that was a missing piece we didn't focus on. The other thing I thought was critical beyond the bridge is that when they said in 2008 when President Barack Obama won, beyond racism, really we were not that, we were beyond Selma. The forces that tried to stop the right to vote lost. The new voters who came in post-Selma became a whole new dynamic. That's to say, blacks could vote, 18-year-olds could vote, women could serve on juries, you could vote bilingually, you could vote on campuses. That generation of newly registered voters defeated the other element in 2008. But the 2008 element, the states' writers never gave up the infrastructure that denied us the right to vote for the women and people of color in the first place. So they never stopped fighting to somehow figure out how to diminish the vote. What we had was not the right to vote merely, but the protected right to vote. That is that with Section 4 and 5, whenever they tried to use gerrymandering, drawing lines, or annexation, or at large, or roll purging, Section 4 would prevent it.
It's Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act that they marched for on that bridge, they were beaten for on that bridge. You're saying that Section 4 was the key in that legislation?
Yeah, in other words, they left us with the car without the key.
Because the Supreme Court knocked out Section 4.
They knocked out the most key provision.
When did that happen? Was that 2013?
June 25th, 2013. So there were people still marching, inspired by the Selma movie, marching on how we won, but no sense of how we lost. We lost the 1965 Voting Rights Act in 2013. We lost the protected right to vote dimension. That we can vote now, but unprotected, under control of, we've gone to segregationists controlling the process. They now draw lines in such a way that they don't deny the right, they simply marginalize blacks into stacking and packing districts, 80% black district, 80% white district. That lays the legal predicate for resegregation, because you can vote but in your box. You can vote but in your box, except this box is bigger because you have the most lawmakers. So even whites who are relatively progressive cannot win because you've lost any influence provision. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you have a district that's 50%, 55% black and 40% white, you can't ignore whites because they can help you or they can defeat you. And the other part is the opposite is true. So the point is that there were people marching without realizing the Voting Rights Act of 65 has been gutted by Section 4 being removed.
In the news, we hear a lot about the gerrymandering and that kind of stuff. Democrats, I think, had 1 million more votes in the congressional race, but still lost the House because of the way the districts have been redrawn. All those things I think are really important. I think it's interesting, though, is that your career includes, on the one hand, this focus on voting, which is kind of the Washington, D.C. deal, but you also now are in Silicon Valley. And you're bringing the same sensibility about inclusion to technology. And I think this is an important democracy question. The future is really not being written in laws so much in Washington, D.C. anymore. There's some negative retrograde action going on, but a lot of the future is being written in code in Silicon Valley. The future is being written in JavaScript in Silicon Valley. Your decision to engage there, why did you decide to go to Silicon Valley? And when you meet with people like Tim Cook, head of Apple, what is that conversation like?
Well, the assignment Dr. King gave me was first to direct Operation Breadbasket, which is the economic arm of SCLC. We go to a given city. His agenda may be end the war, or it may be broad-based public education. But there was an element of people whose interest was in jobs and contracts right now, something ministers could do. So we started Ministers Fight for Jobs and Rights. So this, for example, a Contra Delight milk company with no black truck drivers. We said, we can't drive trucks, we can't buy your milk. We negotiated new relationships. If you have A&P and National Tea stores in the community, we should be able to put our products on the shelves. You should put some of the money in our community bank. We begin to negotiate the private sector so much so until his last speech in Memphis.
Dr. King's last speech.
Dr. King's last, April the 3rd, 1960. He mentions in that speech, he references my name and said, Jesse, what about this company, Shell, Tesla, Coca-Cola? I said, if we cannot get the city to recognize the unions, let's look at the major corporations and figure out how not to support them. Let's spread the pain. So that was in his mind, the workers, Poor People's Campaign, and the private economic sector. I never turned this dimension loose, because in the end, it is the leveraging of our votes, our dollars, and our moral authority that gives us the capacity to fight back. So while voting is very important, when you look at, say, look at 20,000 auto dealerships and 261 African American, we indexed around 20%. Voting has nothing to do with dealerships and supplier contracts. For example, you look at the soft drink companies, beverage, there's not one African American owner of a soft drink company franchise today. So we're voting. So voting has its place, but over here, and the private sector is where the wealth is, where the construction contracts are, who builds highways and builds schools and all. So you get the African American school band, and you look out the window, we don't design one building that students are studying in. So I've always had this penchant, so that it seemed to me that the fastest growing industry in America, the world, is Silicon Valley, it's high tech. Apple hires more people than General Motors ever hired, for example. And yet we lay in the streets and sleep all night long waiting for the door to open. But most of the stores are built in the suburbs and the city, not in the community. That's the concern. But beyond high tech, about 70% of these jobs are not high tech. They are.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about this, because there's this idea that we need more coders. Obviously, Yes We Code is a campaign trying to get more young adults of color interested in coding. So 18 to 30-year-old African American, Latino, Native American women and men, we're trying to inspire them to get involved. And I want to talk with you about that and the process of doing that and building that pipeline. But you made a point when we were at HP that I think would be good for you to raise again. It's not just the coding jobs that you think that technology companies should be looking to include more people in. Say more about that.
We're called the non-tech jobs. I mean, the advertising agencies and marketing, and the creative side, employees, security workers and truck drivers and lawyers, the whole range of support services for the tech engineer type. And so we have been as locked out of the low tech or non-tech as the high tech, kind of locked out of both. And that's why, so that
and why is that? Now, I can tell you why that's bad for African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and women. Why is that bad for technology companies?
because they miss what they want most is growth. When you either pay people to work or pay them not to work, one reason. The other reason is that when in an industry driven by creativity, there's no way of measuring how much creativity you've lost when people are locked out. When people could not get into 4 or 5 major record companies, they made the whole industry called rap. It's created a whole new industry that's built upon creativity, who can out-create the other and create a whole new underground market. But the same is true with high tech. Who knows will have the next best idea? No one has a monopoly on ideas. One guy that we both know, we were protesting for 4 or 5 years the high cost of prison telephone calls.
Yes.
Like $15 for 12 minutes, so just real high cost.
So somebody's locked up, they're trying to call their mother, they're trying to call their father, and they're getting charged $15 a minute.
And they have to collect because they're in prison. If you don't accept the call, you feel guilty. If you do accept, you can't afford to pay the telephone bill. So one of the guys who'd been in jail for 5 years figured out a way to get the telephone hook up on the internet and not go to the big companies. His creativity came out of a very negative jail experience. Another guy who we know who was in jail for breaking in cars, picking the locks. He figured a way that you couldn't pick the lock. So you turn all these negatives into positives, and everybody's, you turn garbage into energy, so to speak. Everybody fits if you make room for them.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, one of the reasons that I think this inclusion agenda is a growth agenda. When we were at Intel, the CEO told a story of how they were trying to design, they're going into wearables now. And a big problem with wearables is, how do you recharge them? You have a wearable bracelet, you have a wearable brooch. How do you recharge it? So they had all these engineers sitting around trying to figure out, well, can you hide the plug this way? Do you have to make a different kind of plug or whatever? And then they realized there was all men trying to figure this out, and a female engineer walked into the room, and she looked at them, and she heard what they were talking about. And she asked a very simple question. She says, do any of you guys even wear jewelry? No, not one of them. Even wore a watch. And she said, listen, if you wear jewelry, all these wearables you're talking about, if you wear jewelry, when you come home, you take them off and you put them in a bowl. Why not have a bowl be able to do the recharging? And that is now a huge breakthrough for them, and they're going to make probably $1 billion off of that, as you said, one idea, by just including one female perspective, or at least one perspective of somebody who actually wore jewelry, male or female. And so I think that we are wasting a lot of genius. We're leaving a lot of money on the table, a lot of opportunity on the table.
We did not know how good baseball could be until everybody could play. They call it the World Series, minus African Americans, minus the Caribbeans, minus the Japanese. That was the World Series. That's the road to a kill, not the road to a door. Now when you have Japanese pitchers and Caribbean hitters and that's the World Series. We must learn to globalize access to information, not just globalize capital.
Yeah. Well, one thing you've been such a big influencer, especially with African Americans, but really, period. I know that Silicon Valley needs to do better. And when we say Silicon Valley, we mean from Austin to Boston, the whole tech sector needs to do better. But Velcro does take 2 sides to stick. And so what do African American, Latino, Native American parents, coaches, teachers, leaders need to be saying to our communities about this opportunity? And do you think we're doing a good enough job pointing to this as a viable place to begin to make a living?
I don't think we're doing as good right now as we should, only because people tend to be what they see. They don't see it, they don't want to be it. So that you have a case where if it's not taught in school, if it's not on television, if it's not popularized through cultural songs, it doesn't exist. So it's not just a matter of being locked out, it's a matter of charging to open the door. So it's a combination of opening up the doors and being able to go to the doors when the doors do open. But what I have found is that there are many people who work, say, in these high-tech companies, Microsoft and all up in the Northwest and others in Silicon Valley, who pull out along with their white counterparts after they hit a certain level. The difference with the white counterpart could then get the capital to repeat the experience. Blacks couldn't get access to the capital, and capital becomes a barrier. Access to capital, industry, technology, and deal flow, and capital becomes subjective, that you lend capital to people that you know, trust, and like. If you don't know, don't trust, don't like, you don't take the risk, and therefore you can't get the capital. So part of the deal with Intel we made with them is a portion of the money will go from Silicon Valley to the looking for engineers. They will not find them at Berkeley or at USC. They'll find them at Howard and Morgan State and Hampton and Northern A&T and Morehouse in Florida and where John Thompson comes from. They'll find black engineers for black engineers that have been educated. You find apple trees where you plant apple seeds. The other part has to do with reaching out, a recruitment program to find non-tech workers. But another big portion is to set up capital base for startup companies. Many conventional rate banks would not lend on risk and creativity. Sometimes not even on the collateral, but certainly not on creativity. And so the companies, if they really want to grow, must plant investment opportunities for people who have ideas.
Well, you know, one thing that we skip past, which I think I should underscore, is the work that you're doing is paying off. You're not just giving speeches about it. You're not just having meetings about it. Intel decided to put $300 million on the table. You can give a round of applause for that. For increased diversity, for women and underrepresented minorities. $300 million is a significant amount of money. Apple.
Particularly compared to 30,000.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. $300 million, that's a lot of money. Apple just announced that they're going to put $50 million on the table to support two efforts to get the pipeline going, to get more scholarship support for women and underrepresented minorities, particularly African Americans, to be able to become a part of this sector. So
one of the big issues has been, can we find STEM students and computer science and engineers? Well, there are schools in the South, post-slavery schools, that major in that. It's not accidental to their purpose. A&T means to produce engineers. Right. John Thompson, from chairman of Microsoft, who did here Symantec.
African American.
From Florida A&M. Yeah. So these schools have some intentionality, therefore they must be seen as a great resource base for tech industry.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you're saying, which I think is really important for folks to learn, there may be people here who are leading startups. There may be people here who are investing in companies. There may be people here who are a part of the legacy corporations. There's a term that we use, and sometimes we say it so fast that people don't even know what we're talking about. We say HBCUs, and that's not a venture capital firm you haven't heard of. HBCUs are historically black colleges and universities. Throughout the country, because under segregation we weren't allowed to go to other schools, African American children and grandchildren often of slaves actually created some of the most impressive educational institutions in the history of the world. That's not a bold claim.
Dr. King came out of one.
Exactly. If you look at who came out of them, Thurgood Marshall came out. You said Howard, Spelman. You can go down the whole list. Morehouse. If I start listing, don't list them all, I might get in trouble. But there's a whole.
We can't stop before you get to North Carolina.
Exactly. I got North Carolina A&M right here. Lane College, where my parents went. So you have this incredible set of resources that if you are aware of as an employer, as an investor, as an innovator, you might be able to corner some markets because everything isn't just Stanford, MIT, Caltech. I'm proud to be a fellow at MIT, but there's a lot of other institutions out there that are creating genius.
And we found that they had not been recruiting in those schools either.
Yeah, they weren't aware.
And so once they start recruiting there, whatever adjustments they need to make, quality of education like, Google began to put some of their people in Howard's math and science department to raise the standards to meet a certain level. You know, it's like in basketball, if 8 feet high is the goal, people dunk it. If they raise it 10 feet, people dunk 10 feet. People will adjust once they know what the rules are. And you see, part of our struggle to make America better is this issue of one set of rules. Why are we so good at football and basketball and baseball and all that, in spite of horrible social conditions? Because whenever the playing field is even and the rules are public and the goals are clear, the referees are fair and the score is transparent, we can make it. And that tends not to be true outside the line. We find what's kind of embarrassing is the number of black students that come out of Stanford. The white students, their classmates go to Silicon Valley and they go back home saying, I went to Stanford. They come out of Stanford with different sets of opportunities. So there is a discrimination factor. But I put a lot more focus on finding progressive people like Tim Cook and people like Chris Sanich, who really are kind of anxious to be part of something new.
Yes, and I think that's really important. And you know, there's some great organizations I want to just give some credit to. When you look at the existing pipeline into the talent pipeline that's recognized that all you guys are familiar with and celebrate, the Department of Labor came out with a shocking report that really, I think, should have gotten the attention of the whole country. They said that the United States is going to be 1 million tech workers short of the need in 8 years. In other words, there's going to be a need for about 1.4 million tech workers, but the existing pipeline is only going to produce about 400,000, which means you got a 1 million worker shortfall. What does that mean? Listen, Caltech, Stanford, and MIT have not produced 1 million graduates, period, in the history of it. They're not going to be able to solve that problem in 8 years. So you now have to start building other pipelines or activating other pipelines. Where can you look? 5 places. Historically black colleges and universities and Latino serving or Hispanic serving institutions. Why do you look there? As Reverend said, you already have young people.
The infrastructure.
But the infrastructure, the young people, they're there. You don't have to go make it up. They're already there, and they've just been overlooked. You also have the tribal colleges on the reservations where Native American students are and need hope and opportunity and have genius that's not being tapped. You also have the so-called boot camps, these new organizations that can teach people in 3 to 6 months how to at least get an entry-level programming job. Entry-level is $50,000 to $80,000 a year. Now, if you start telling African-American, Latino, and Native American grandmamas alone, just them, that their grandkids can make $70,000 a year if they work hard and study well for 6 months, you're not going to have a problem in terms of people wanting to be a part of this. So if the numbers matter, you guys love numbers. Numbers matter. 1 million is a number that we've got to figure out. $70,000 to $80,000 starting your salary, that's a number we need to start popularizing.
That's why this thing is not a matter of genes.
Yes.
It's agenda, it's priorities. I remember as a kid when the Russians sent up Sputnik, man to the moon. And I think that was Sputnik.
Yeah.
And there was this fear that the Russians would have this advantage over us in space. They'll be able to go to the moon and shoot it with a shotgun or something like that. It's real exciting. So we immediately passed something called the National Education Defense Act. And if you want to go back to school, you could have been a music teacher or a football coach. You go back to school to take science courses. Come out of high school, studying science, you got paid to go to school. Within 5 years, we caught the Russians surpassed them because we targeted. And paid to go to college? as opposed to student loan debt, get paid to go to college, go back to summer school if you can get extra credits because you took a science course. They bomb rush to schools. So that if we really want to meet the million-person goal, it's a matter of opening up the doors. But if student loan debt's greater than credit card debt, that's a contradiction. You can't come out with a guaranteed debt or a guaranteed college. We must fight for student loan debt forgiveness as a stimulus.
Yes, yeah, for that. Yeah.
How many of you in student loan debt? Raise your hand. That's my point. So why go and take a challenging engineering course which may take 6 years, for example, and when you can take something that's less challenging and make some more immediately gratifying money? So my case is if we design our education system for what we need and invest in them on the front side, we'll have better results on the back side.
Absolutely. And let me just, to make this very concrete, this boot camp opportunity, which I very much hope that you as employers will take more seriously. Some of these boot camps are working with Reverend Jackson and other programs. Let me just name two really quickly. There's a group called Code 2040. Code 2040 is actually working with Reverend Jackson. He's got a conference we're going to talk about real quick on May 6th. They are taking some of the graduates from places like Stanford, African American, Latino, Native American women and men, from the top schools who, for whatever reason, have not been able to make that transition over into technology. There's something you guys talk about all the time called cultural fit. You're going to start a startup. Well, it's very important that everybody you hire has a cultural fit. Well, that can sometimes be good. You know, if the culture is we work hard, that's good. But if the culture is everybody is the same kind, likes the same kind of geek culture, that may not be as good. You may leave people out. So Code 2040 is doing an extraordinary job of taking already super talented superstars and getting them tech ready, job ready, pitch ready. And Code 2040 is a group I hope all of you guys will be in contact with.
Well,
they're going to be there.
I cannot emphasize enough, you talk about it by May 6th, but the number of, I found, I really, to my surprise, maybe the amazement, once we began to open up this discussion, Silicon Atlanta, Silicon Chicago, Silicon LA, all these groups would pull it out, had all the right capacity, but couldn't get the money, couldn't get the startup capital, couldn't get the investment. That's why so much of our focus in Silicon Valley.
And what's interesting is that it's a cultural thing. There's a way. I was talking to Laura Weidman Powers, who runs Code 2040, and she said, you do have people, they're very talented, they can do the coding, but when they go into the meeting, they're asked to do it on a whiteboard. Well, they weren't necessarily doing it on a whiteboard. So they could do the work, they couldn't deal with the interview. And so these little cultural things, so they said, well, we're going to teach you how to do it on a whiteboard. It wasn't they had to teach them how to code, they had to teach them how to show that they could code. Little things like that.
That's why teachers care, must care. It's some people care that you know, but it's also know that you care. I remember one time, it's a bit far afield, but when we were in the first grade learning, timetables and read, either add and subtract and all that. And we were learning pretty good. And the students in second grade said, this is nothing. Next year, you're going to have decimals and fractions. So what you're learning is nothing. It kind of put us down. And we took Mrs. Pitt's exam, and it came decimals and fractions, and we didn't do very well. And we thought when we came to class next day, she would be very stern. She was a very stern lady, didn't smile very much. And she was smiling. We knew something was off. And on the table, she had $1 bill, a whole dollar, and some 50 cents and quarter dime nickels and pennies, and some apples cut. Well, she said, what's this dime? She said, how many of these make $1? 10. She found a language that we could learn in. Now, she could have gave all of us F's and said something was wrong with us. But she figured the teacher, something was wrong with her. She had not put the teaching in the language format that we could grasp.
Yeah.
And so often the same is true with even learning tech. You must have teachers who care enough to work until they figure out what your cultural rhythm is.
Yeah, I love that. So just again, those of you who want to make sure you understand the pipeline so you can be a part of what Reverend Jackson's trying to open up. Historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, very important. The tribal colleges, very important. The boot camps are very important. Community colleges now are starting to try to figure out how they can offer more STEM and tech and coding courses. That's going to be very important. And then lastly, there are going to be some ed tech solutions, some online solutions, but those are going to be the places you can begin to look to try to find a different kind of talent pool. And then you have a group, for instance, you mentioned Los Angeles. Silicon Beach in Los Angeles has a boot camp now called Sabio, SABIO.LA. You have Silicon Beach down there. There are more startups that are moving in Los Angeles with a completely different rhythm and culture and speed and mix of people. And they have a boot camp there called Sabio LA. Now you might get an application from somebody who says, listen, I've spent 3 months, 6 months at Sabio, and you think, well, I've never heard of Sabio, and you might not realize that that is fast becoming a true talent accelerator in a growing market. So you've got to be looking beyond, well, either I know this person because they came through my network, or they come with a stamp from MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and begin to realize that there are now completely different lanes of talent that begin to open up and accelerated by your work.
Talk a bit about May 6th for them, because your organization is a part of it. We're convening a body of people, I think, at the Hyatt on El Embarcadero in San Francisco on May 6th to deal with, kind of consolidate some of this, because the people in LA tend not to know the ones in Dallas or Austin or New York or Chicago. We've been trying to pull these forces and find out what are the common ground. The common ground is that there are lots of qualified people, lots of experienced people, but lots of people who cannot get to capital and cannot have a process to start early on as opposed to later on. Talk a bit about that conference.
Good. Well, I mean, we're excited about it. May 6th coming up really quickly. San Francisco High School near the Embarcadero. If you look at the Bay Area,
Hyatt.
I'm sorry.
High school.
Yeah, I'm sorry. San Francisco Hyatt near the Embarcadero. How many people are here from the Bay Area? Okay, so we got a few. One of the crazy things about the Bay Area, by the way, is if you're in Oakland, say East Oakland, one of the most diverse cities in the world, one of the most diverse school systems in the world. I mean, you don't just have African Americans, Latinos. I mean, you have Samoan, Filipino, Ethiopian. I mean, literally almost every kind of kid ever born. Every gender, sexuality, faith, color, class is in Oakland. 33 minutes from the Google campus. 37 minutes from the Apple campus. Most of those kids will never get there, even as a visitor, let alone as a worker, and that's a shame.
Well, so, we intend to make that Underground Railroad.
Yes.
From Oakland, and San Francisco, and I think what we've been able to do is to convince the companies that it's more expensive to lock people up than lift them up. That at the time when we can be building. I look in the airports at who's at the chargers working their computer, and by and large, people who are in it because they're the inside track. Effort and excellence means a lot. Inheritance and access means even more. And that those who have the access are advanced, not because they are better, because opportunities are better. So the more we are committed to evening opportunity access, the more America will grow. I mean, imagine American basketball minus black ball players. It wasn't supposed to be the case. They also drew about 1,000 people per night, too. Imagine football without black ball players. Once we set the rules that were clear and goals, then the talent pace open. And I'm just excited, frankly. Sometimes I get teary-eyed. Wish Dr. King would get to see the predicate that we have now set. If we believe and don't disbelieve and are not cynical, we have the capacity to fulfill America's dreams and be better servants to the whole world. People need more of our high-tech knowledge and communication than they need our weapons. when the crisis hit Sierra Leone and Guinea and Liberia, and people were dying with Ebola, we sent in engineers to make hospitals, makeshift hospitals. That's who we're at our best, transferring skills, not weapons.
That's good. Well, we're going to be at this conference we're doing on May 6th. A couple things are going to happen. First of all, there's going to be a startup pitch competition. So, everybody knows a lot of people who are at the startup stage. They should be there. Lisa Jackson, who was Obama's head of the EPA, is now at Apple, African-American woman, environmentalist.
In the C-suite.
In the C-suite. She's going to be there to speak as a woman of color who's had such an extraordinary reputation and record both in public service and private sector. She will be there. That's going to be very important. There are also going to be a number of leaders of all kinds, public, private, startups, et cetera. We think it's going to be...
Brian Castanet from Intel will speak at the luncheon, for example.
The boss, the CEO of Intel.
And so beyond that, January 20th through 24th, for those who are not in the Bay Area, is the Rainbow Push Convention in Chicago.
What are those dates again?
Chicago, Illinois, January 20th through 24th.
Okay.
I guess the point I'm trying to make to you is that we must make access to technology and this new machinery a crusade, not just for everybody, not just a campaign for the few. Whether it's Samoan Islands or whether it's Southern Alabama, we have people who are not even allowed in the door of the industry. We got to pull down those barriers. You put down, and it's being led by the inimitable Mr. Butch Wing, by the way, give Butch his credits. You put two seeds in the ground of equal strength, and you water the both of them, and you put a wall between them. One will grow tall with multiples of fruit, and one will be stunted. The taller one is not a better one, not a smaller, a lesser one. It's the one that had access to sunshine, or photosynthesis. That's the one that grew. When the walls come down, we can all grow. And that's part of our kind of the civil rights dimension. We wanted everybody to have a chance to grow.
Well said, well said. One thing in the 4 minutes that we have remaining, you've been a hero to me, inspiration to me. One of my earliest memories of anything with regard to the public world was watching you give that speech in '84. I mean, anybody who had, if you were on planet Earth and had a pulse, you had goosebumps. That speech is on iTunes right now. If you haven't heard it, you guys think that there are people on public stage now who give good speeches, and oh my God, that was a great speech. If you can speak after the speech, it was not a good speech. This man has set a standard for public oratory that has not been touched since he left the presidential campaign trail. And it's important because words matter, young people matter. You would go, as one of the most famous people in the world, to high school gymnasiums. You would come to town, you would be meeting with the governor, you would be going on TV, but you would stop in those public schools. I was in those public schools. And you would say, I am, and we would say, I am, and you say, somebody, and we say, somebody. And you would give us
where that came from, Van, was after Dr. King was killed, and we were so down. We really were hurt. And while we were trying to make an adjustment to his death of sorts, June 5th, Robert Kennedy was killed. I mean, like boom, boom, like a double traumatic blow. And I've been asked by Dr. Abernathy to be the mayor of Resurrection City, and to kind of convene the folk everyone, because we had this tent cities. We kept going. We would not allow one bullet to kill the whole movement, so we kind of kept pushing. And on the back of a truck one morning, had been raining, and it was very muddy, and a couple of guys had died from hepatitis. And they were looking to me to give them something, some a bus fare, some money. I had nothing to give them, but I remember a book I had read some time ago by Dr. Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited. So when you're reduced to your irreducible essence, and there's nothing left, standing naked against the world, you're still somebody. You still matter. That I saw a friend of mine who was a baby thrown away by his parents in a garbage can, found by a janitor who is now a PhD in philosophy. When you reduce to your irreducible, there's still, and I started saying, I am somebody. I may be poor, may be unemployed, may be unskilled. And it grew out of a situation. Situations matter. And the capacity to speak to them matter. And while we say black matters, it's everybody matters. We are a multicultural global world. And we find that when you globalize access to technology and globalize access to health care and women's rights and children's rights, environmental rights, we all become better. I was in India last year, out in the middle of way out and across the road from Bangladesh. Kid was out in the field doing our tech back home. That's how the world has been impacted by this science.
Yeah, yeah.
And you are a special genius, and we thank you so much.
Thank you.
It would not, CNN today would not be what it is without you, Van.
Well, tell my boss that. Reverend Jesse Jackson. Very good. Very good. Very good.
And we're sourcing the ladies that will come to our academy in 2 avenues. First of all, through other companies that would like to take our program and have us train their ladies, or through the Ministry of Labor and the Human Resources Development Fund. We'll be working with ladies that then don't have jobs. And what we would do is work with almost like preferred vendors and do on-the-job training where they've got 2 days in our academy and 3 days on the job.